The Universe Experiencing Itself, by David Rousseau. What if everything you have ever known, your thoughts, your memories, your sense of you, is not separate from the cosmos, but the universe becoming aware of itself through a single point in space and time? Every atom in your body was forged in the heart of ancient stars. Every breath you take is a continuation of cosmic history, billions of years in the making. You are not merely in the universe, you are what the universe is doing right now, observing, questioning, and experiencing itself. This is not metaphor, it is perspective. And if it is true, it changes everything. Introduction. For most of human history, we have asked what the universe is made of. But a deeper question quietly emerges beneath that curiosity. Why does the universe feel like anything at all? Modern science describes a vast, expanding cosmos governed by physical laws. Consciousness, meanwhile, remains one of the greatest unresolved mysteries. Somewhere between neurons firing in the brain and galaxies forming in deep space lies a profound possibility that awareness itself is not separate from the universe, but an expression of it. This audiobook explores that idea from multiple angles: scientific, philosophical, and experiential. It does not claim final answers. Instead, it invites you into a way of seeing reality where separation dissolves and existence becomes a single unfolding process. You are not just listening to a story about the universe, you are part of it interpreting itself. We are made of star stuff. Carl Sagan. Chapter 1. Stardust Origins. Everything begins in fire. Not the kind of fire you know, the flicker of a candle or the controlled burn of a furnace, but a fire so immense it reshaped the structure of reality itself. In the earliest moments after the Big Bang, the universe was a seething ocean of energy, too hot for atoms to exist, too dense for light to travel freely. There were no stars, no planets, no observers, only raw potential. As the universe expanded, it cooled, energy condensed into the simplest building blocks, hydrogen and helium. For millions of years, that was all there was, vast clouds of invisible gas drifting through a dark, silent cosmos. Then gravity began its quiet work. Over immense stretches of time, those clouds collapsed inward, drawn together by their own mass. Pressure built, temperatures rose, and eventually, in scattered points across the void, the first stars ignited. Light returned to the universe. Inside these stars, something extraordinary began. Under crushing pressure and unimaginable heat, hydrogen atoms fused together to form helium, releasing energy in the process. But that was only the beginning. In the cores of larger stars, fusion continued: helium into carbon, carbon into oxygen, oxygen into heavier elements. Each stage required more energy, more force, more intensity. The universe was learning how to build. Every element that makes up your body, every atom of carbon in your cells, every trace of calcium in your bones, every iron atom flowing through your blood was forged in these stellar furnaces. Not metaphorically, literally. You are built from the inside of stars. But creation requires destruction. When massive stars reached the end of their lives, they could no longer sustain the delicate balance between gravity pulling inward and energy pushing outward. The result was catastrophic. In a fraction of a second, the star collapsed and then exploded outward in a brilliant supernova, scattering its enriched contents across space. These explosions were not endings. They were acts of distribution. The elements created deep within stars were hurled into the surrounding cosmos, mixing with gas and dust, seeding new generations of stars and, eventually, planetary systems. Over billions of years, this cycle repeated: formation, fusion, collapse, explosion, creation through transformation. In one small region of a spiral galaxy around an unremarkable star, a cloud of this recycled material began to gather. Particles collided, clumped, and slowly assembled into something new, a planet. That planet would come to be known as Earth. On its surface, conditions stabilized, temperatures settled, liquid water formed, chemistry became more complex, and then, at some point, no one knows exactly when or how, matter crossed a threshold. Molecules began to replicate, systems began to sustain themselves, life emerged. From star-forged elements came living processes. From living processes came sensation, perception, awareness, and eventually, from that long chain of transformations, came you. Right now, as you read or listen to these words, trillions of atoms are interacting within your body in precise, coordinated patterns. The iron in your blood carries oxygen through your veins. The calcium in your bones supports your structure. The carbon forms the backbone of the molecules that make thought itself possible. None of it originated here. Every atom has a history that predates the Earth, the Sun, even the galaxy itself. The matter that composes you has been part of stars, drifting gas clouds, and cosmic debris fields. It has existed in different forms, different structures, different contexts across billions of years. You are not separate from that history. You are a continuation of it. To say that you are made of stardust is not poetic exaggeration, it is a precise description of your origins. The universe did not simply create stars and then, separately, create you. The processes are connected, continuous, unbroken. The same laws of physics that ignited the first stars are active within you now. The same elements that burned in stellar cores are arranged, in this moment, into a system capable of thought, memory, and awareness. This changes the way we think about identity. You are not an isolated object that appeared suddenly on a small planet. You are a current expression of an ongoing, cosmic process, a pattern formed from ancient material, temporarily organized into a living structure. The story of the universe is not something that happened out there, long ago. It is happening here, now, within you. Every breath you take connects you to that history. The oxygen you inhale was forged in stellar reactions billions of years ago. It has traveled across space, cycled through ecosystems, and now participates in the chemistry of your body. You are participating in a process that began before the Earth existed. And when you look up at the night sky, at distant stars scattered across the darkness, you are not seeing something entirely separate from yourself. You are, in a very real sense, looking at where you came from, and perhaps, in a deeper sense, what you still are. The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. Carl Sagan. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Reality. At first glance, reality feels solid. The ground beneath your feet appears stable. Objects have weight, shape, and boundaries. Your body seems clearly defined, separate from everything around it. This is the world as your senses present it: intuitive, reliable, and consistent. But beneath that familiar surface lies something far stranger. Modern physics reveals that what we perceive as solid matter is mostly empty space. Atoms, the building blocks of everything you can touch, are composed of a dense nucleus surrounded by a vast region where electrons are likely to be found. If an atom were scaled to the size of a cathedral, its nucleus would be no larger than a grain of sand. Everything you experience as solid is structure without solidity form, emerging from almost nothing. This strange picture deepens as we look closer. According to quantum field theory, the universe is not fundamentally made of particles at all, but of fields, continuous, invisible entities that exist everywhere in space. What we call a particle is actually a localized excitation in one of these fields. Like a ripple traveling across the surface of water, an electron is not a tiny object moving through space. It is a pattern in a field. A proton is a more complex pattern. You, in turn, are an intricate arrangement of patterns interacting with other patterns, all governed by consistent mathematical relationships. Reality is not built from things. It is built from interactions. Zoom out, and the picture shifts again. Gravity, once understood as a force pulling objects together, is described by general relativity as the curvature of space-time itself. Massive objects like stars and planets do not simply exert influence. They reshape the geometry around them. Space bends, time slows, motion follows the contours of this invisible structure. You are not just located in space and time. You are moving within a dynamic fabric that is constantly being shaped by everything it contains. Even time, which feels like a steady flow from past to future, is not absolute. Its passage depends on speed and gravity. Clocks tick differently depending on where they are and how they move. The now you experience is not universal, it is local, specific to your position in the cosmos. The deeper we look, the less reality resembles a fixed stage on which events unfold. Instead, it appears as a set of underlying rules, a framework that allows patterns to emerge, interact, and evolve. And at the smallest scales, certainty itself begins to dissolve. In quantum mechanics, outcomes are not determined with absolute precision, but described in terms of probabilities. A particle does not have a single, definite position until it is measured. Instead, it exists in a range of possibilities, a spread of potential states. Reality, at its foundation, is not entirely fixed. It is partially open. This does not mean the universe is chaotic or random in a simple sense. The probabilities follow strict mathematical laws. Patterns still emerge, structure still forms, but beneath that structure lies a layer of indeterminacy, subtle flexibility in how events unfold. It is within this framework that complexity arises. From simple rules come atoms, from atoms come molecules, from molecules come chemistry, stars, planets, and eventually life. Each level builds on the previous one, creating new behaviors that cannot be fully predicted by examining the parts alone. This is the architecture of reality, not a collection of separate objects, but a hierarchy of patterns, each emerging from deeper, underlying processes. And somewhere within this layered structure, something unexpected appears, not just matter, not just energy, but experience, a system complex enough to not only exist, but to register its own existence, a pattern capable of recognizing patterns. The universe, through this architecture, gives rise to something that can ask questions about the very structure that produced it. That is where the mystery deepens, because if reality at its core is made of fields, probabilities, and curved space-time, if everything reduces to interactions and mathematical relationships, then where, within this vast and intricate system, does the feeling of being arise? Where does the sense of I come from? How does a universe of patterns become aware of its own patterns? The architecture of reality does not yet answer that question, but it leads directly to it. And in that question, the next chapter begins. Reality is not what it seems, nor is it something we can easily reduce to intuition. Stephen Hawking. Chapter 3. The Emergence of Awareness. At some point, the universe began to notice. For billions of years after the Big Bang, there were stars, galaxies, and vast cosmic structures evolving in silence. Matter interacted, energy flowed, complexity increased, but there is no evidence that anything felt like anything. The universe existed, but did it experience? Then something changed. On at least one small planet, under a narrow range of conditions, matter organized itself into living systems. Chemistry became biology. Molecules formed networks capable of replication, adaptation, and survival. Over time, these systems grew more complex, developing sensory mechanisms to respond to their environment. Light was no longer just radiation. It was something that could be seen. Sound was no longer just vibration. It was something that could be heard. At some stage in this evolutionary process, a threshold was crossed, not just sensing but experiencing, not just reacting but feeling. Awareness emerged. This is one of the deepest mysteries in science and philosophy, often referred to as hard problem of consciousness. We can describe the brain in extraordinary detail: neurons firing, signals transmitting, regions activating in response to stimuli. But none of these descriptions fully explain why those processes are accompanied by an inner experience. Why does neural activity feel like anything at all? Why is there a perspective from the inside? You can trace the pathways of light entering the eye, converting into electrical signals, traveling through the brain. You can map the exact regions responsible for processing color, motion, and depth. But nowhere in that chain do you find the color red as it is experienced, or the sensation of seeing. There is a gap between description and experience, a gap between structure and awareness. Some scientists argue that consciousness is an emergent property, something that arises when a system reaches a sufficient level of complexity. According to this view, awareness is not present in the fundamental building blocks of the universe, but appears when matter is organized in the right way. Much like liquidity emerges from individual water molecules, others propose a more radical possibility, that consciousness, in some form, is not something that suddenly appears, but something that is woven into the fabric of reality itself. This perspective, sometimes associated with panpsychism, suggests that even the simplest components of the universe may possess extremely basic forms of experience, which combine and evolve into the rich awareness we know. There is no consensus, and that uncertainty is revealing. It suggests that consciousness is not just another problem to be solved, but a boundary of understanding, a place where our current models of reality begin to break down. Yet one fact remains undeniable. Awareness exists. Right now, there is something it is like to be you. You are not just processing information, you are experiencing it. Thoughts arise, sensations unfold, emotions move through you, and all of it appears within a field of awareness that cannot be directly observed from the outside. This is the strange loop at the heart of existence. The universe has produced systems that can model the universe, but more than that, it has produced systems that can experience those models from within. When you look at a tree, photons reflect off its surface, enter your eyes, and trigger neural activity in your brain. But alongside that physical process, there is the experience of seeing a vivid, immediate presence that cannot be reduced to equations or signals. The tree appears to you, and that to you is the mystery. Where does that perspective reside? Is it located somewhere in the brain? Is it distributed across neural processes? Or is it something that cannot be pinned down to a specific place at all? We do not yet know, but we do know this. The emergence of awareness marks a turning point in the story of the universe. Before awareness, there were only events. After awareness, there are experiences. Before awareness, the universe changed. After awareness, the universe is noticed changing through living systems, and especially through minds capable of reflection. The cosmos gains something entirely new, an interior dimension, a way of existing not just externally, but internally, a way of being not just structured, but felt. And in that shift, a new possibility arises. The universe is no longer only unfolding. It is, in some sense, witnessing its own unfolding. Through perception, thought, and reflection, reality becomes aware of itself, not everywhere, not all at once, but in localized points of view. In beings like you, you are one of those points, a place where matter has become mind, where process has become perspective, where the universe, for a brief moment, is not only existing, but knowing that it exists. The real mystery is not what the universe is made of, but why it is aware at all. Inspired by David Chalmers. Chapter 4, The Illusion of Separation. You experience yourself as a boundary. There is an inside your thoughts, your sensations, your sense of me, and there is an outside the world of objects, other people, and events unfolding beyond your control. This division feels immediate and unquestionable, as if it were built into reality itself. But this boundary, clear as it seems, is not as solid as it appears. It is constructed. Your brain is constantly receiving vast amounts of information, light, sound, pressure, temperature, internal signals from your body. To make sense of it all, it organizes experience into manageable categories: self and other, subject and object, inside and outside. This process is not a flaw, it is a necessity. Without it, the world would be an overwhelming blur of undifferentiated input. But what is useful is not always fundamental. The feeling of being a separate self is, in many ways, a model of simplified representation that allows you to navigate reality efficiently. It creates a center of experience, a reference point from which everything else is perceived. Yet that center is not as fixed as it feels. Consider your body. It seems like a clear boundary, defined by your skin. But your body is in constant exchange with the environment. With every breath, you take in molecules from the air and release others back into it. With every sip of water, every bite of food, matter flows into you, becomes part of you, and eventually leaves again. Where, exactly, does you end and the world begin? The atoms that make up your body today were not part of you a year ago. They will not all remain part of you in the future. The physical substance of your body is not static, it is a continuous process of transformation. You are not a sealed container. You are an open system. The same is true at a deeper level. Your thoughts, which feel personal and self-generated, are shaped by language, culture, memory, and interaction with others. The words you use were learned. The ideas you hold were influenced. Even the structure of your thinking reflects patterns you did not create from nothing. Your inner world is not entirely separate from the outer one. It is formed by it. Neuroscience suggests that what we call the self is not a single, unified entity, but a collection of processes: sensory integration, memory, prediction, and attention working together to create the impression of continuity. There is no single point in the brain where the self resides. Instead, it emerges from dynamic activity across many regions. The self is not a thing. It is an ongoing construction. Philosophical traditions have explored this insight for centuries. In Buddhism, the concept of anatta, or non-self, suggests that what we take to be a permanent identity is, in fact, a temporary aggregation of changing processes. Clinging to a fixed sense of self, according to this view, is a source of confusion and suffering. Modern science, from a different direction, arrives at a similar conclusion. The boundaries we perceive are real at one level. They have practical consequences. They shape behavior, but they are not absolute. They are part of how the mind organizes experience, not necessarily how reality is ultimately structured. Even at the level of physics, separation becomes less clear. Every object exerts gravitational influence on every other object, no matter how distant. Fields extend across space. Particles interact, exchange energy, and become entangled in ways that challenge classical ideas of independence. Everything is, in some sense, connected, not always in obvious or immediate ways, but through a network of relationships that spans the entire cosmos. This does not mean individuality disappears. You still have a perspective, a history, a particular configuration that makes you distinct, but that distinctness exists within a larger continuity. Like a wave in the ocean, a wave has a shape, a form, a temporary identity. You can point to it, describe it, even name it, but it is not separate from the water. It is the water, moving in a particular way. In the same sense, you are not separate from the universe. You are the universe, expressed as a particular pattern, localized, temporary, and constantly changing. The feeling of separation is part of that pattern. It allows you to act, to decide, to survive. But it can also obscure a deeper truth, that the line between self and world is not a fixed boundary, but a useful distinction drawn within a continuous whole. And when that distinction softens, even slightly, something shifts. The world no longer feels entirely out there, and you no longer feel entirely in here. Instead, there is a sense of participation, of being part of a larger process that extends beyond any single point of view, a process in which everything is connected, not by abstraction, but by shared existence. The illusion of separation does not need to be destroyed. It only needs to be seen for what it is, a perspective, not the whole picture. You are something the whole universe is doing, in the same way a wave is something the whole ocean is doing. Alan Watts. Chapter 5. The Observer Effect. At first glance, observation feels effortless. You direct your attention towards something, and it is simply there. You take a measurement, and a result is obtained and written down. In daily life, observing seems like a quiet, passive act, almost as if reality is already complete and our awareness merely documents what exists. Yet at the most fundamental level, that assumption begins to break down. In quantum mechanics, measurement is not a neutral window into reality. It plays an active role in shaping what can be described. Experiments show that particles like electrons do not behave as tiny objects with definite positions and trajectories. Instead, they are described by a spread of probabilities, a range of possible states indicating where they might be and how they might behave. This indeterminacy persists until a measurement is made. The classic demonstration is the double-slit experiment. When particles pass through two narrow openings without being observed, they form an interference pattern, behaving as though each particle travels multiple paths, like a wave interacting with itself. But when a detector is used to determine which slit each particle goes through, the interference pattern vanishes. The outcome is different, not because the particle chooses differently, but because the experimental conditions have changed. Measurement is not a detached glance, it is an interaction. And interaction necessarily involves disturbance, however small, between the system being measured and the system doing the measuring. This is often labeled the observer effect, though that phrase can be misleading. It is not awareness alone that alters outcomes, but the physical act of measurement, energy exchange, entanglement between systems, and the unavoidable coupling required to extract information. Even so, the implications are striking. At quantum scales, nature does not settle into a single, well-defined state until it is measured in a specific way. Before measurement, it is described by superposed possibilities. After measurement, one outcome is realized and recorded. Reality, at this level, does not appear fully predetermined. It seems, in a limited sense, responsive. Different interpretations of quantum theory attempt to account for this behavior. Some propose that every possible outcome unfolds in branching histories. Others argue that the wave of possibilities collapses into a single event when measurement occurs. Still others search for deeper mechanisms that might explain the transition from probability to definiteness. No consensus has been reached, but across all interpretations, one idea consistently appears: the observer and the observed cannot be completely separated. This challenges a classical worldview in which the universe exists independently and observation simply reveals what is already there. In quantum physics, that clean division becomes less certain. Observation becomes part of the system. This raises a deeper question. If measurement requires interaction, and interaction helps determine outcomes, what role, if any, does consciousness play in the process? Is awareness simply witnessing results generated elsewhere, or is it somehow connected to how experience becomes defined? Most physicists remain cautious here. The mathematical framework of quantum mechanics works without invoking consciousness. Measurement can be fully described through physical systems, detectors, particles, fields, and interactions governed by consistent laws. Still, one aspect remains philosophically intriguing. Even if the physics of measurement is complete without reference to awareness, the experience of the result always appears within consciousness. A detector may register a value, but that value only becomes meaningful when it is observed and understood. Physical data becomes lived experience. There are, then, two layers to observation. The first is physical, the interaction that produces a measurable result. The second is experiential, the awareness in which that result is registered. Science describes the first layer with extraordinary precision. The second is more difficult to reduce or define. What remains clear is that observation is never nothing. It is not a passive void. It is an encounter between systems, a moment where possibilities are narrowed into a single outcome, where information is exchanged, and where reality takes on a definite form. And as a conscious being, you are continuously part of this unfolding. Your senses are constantly in contact with the world. Light enters your eyes. Vibrations reach your ears. Signals are processed by the nervous system, constructing an internal model of what is happening outside you. Alongside this modeling, there is also awareness, the direct, subjective experience of those signals. You are not merely located inside the universe. You are in ongoing engagement with it, influencing and being influenced through every interaction. The observer effect does not imply that thought alone can reshape reality. Instead, it points to something more subtle. Observation is embedded within the same network of processes that produces physical events. It is not external to reality. It is one of the ways reality becomes definite. The universe is not simply a collection of isolated objects. It is a web of interactions. And within that web, observation is one of the mechanisms through which potential outcomes become actual experiences, through measurement, through interaction, and, in your case, through awareness. What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. Werner Heisenberg, Chapter 6, Time as Experience. Time feels like the most familiar thing in the world. It moves forward, always forward. The past is fixed, the future is open, and the present is the thin edge where reality unfolds. You remember what has happened, you anticipate what might come next, and you experience everything within the steady flow of now. But this sense of time, so immediate, so unquestioned, is not as simple as it seems. In physics, time is not an absolute backdrop against which events occur. According to relativity, time is intertwined with space. forming a four-dimensional structure known as space-time. Within this framework, the passage of time depends on motion and gravity. Clocks tick at different rates depending on how fast they are moving or how close they are to massive objects. Time can stretch, time can slow. Time is not the same everywhere. Two observers, moving differently or located in different gravitational fields, may disagree on how much time has passed between the same events, and both can be correct within their own frame of reference. The idea of a single, universal now begins to dissolve. What feels like a shared present moment is, in fact, local, tied to your specific position and motion in the universe, somewhere far away. Events you would consider future may already have occurred from another perspective. The division between past, present, and future is not built into reality in the way our intuition suggests. It is, at least in part, constructed. And yet, despite this flexibility in physics, your experience of time feels remarkably consistent. Moments appear in sequence, causes precede effects, memories accumulate behind you while possibilities stretch ahead. This brings us to a deeper question. If time is so relative in the physical world, why does it feel so directional in the mind? Part of the answer lies in memory. You remember the past, but not the future. Your brain records information, creating a sense of continuity and narrative that links one moment to the next. Without memory, the flow of time would collapse into a series of disconnected experiences. But memory alone does not explain the full richness of temporal experience. Time can feel fast or slow depending on your state of mind. Moments of intense focus or joy can seem to pass in an instant, while boredom or discomfort can stretch seconds into something that feels much longer. In extreme situations, time can appear to slow dramatically, as if the mind is processing more detail within the same physical interval. The clock does not change, but experience does. This suggests that time, as you live it, is not just a property of the external world, it is also shaped by how the mind organizes and interprets events. Time is, in part, constructed by awareness. There is another layer to consider. At the most fundamental level, the laws of physics do not strongly distinguish between past and future. Many equations work the same whether time moves forward or backward. And yet, in everyday life, time clearly has a direction. Eggs break, but do not spontaneously reassemble. Heat flows from hot to cold, and events unfold in a consistent sequence. This direction is often associated with the concept of increasing disorder, described by entropy. As systems evolve, they tend to move from more ordered states to less ordered ones, creating what is sometimes called the arrow of time. But even this arrow is not something you directly perceive. What you perceive is change. What you experience is succession. What you remember is a trail of moments that gives the impression of movement through time. Perhaps time, as you know it, is not something you are traveling through like a path, but something that emerges from the way events are organized and experienced. Not a river you move along, but a structure your awareness helps to define. In this sense, each moment is not simply a point between past and future. It is a complete instance of reality, containing within it traces of what has been and possibilities of what could be. The feeling of flow arises because these moments are linked by causality, by memory, by the continuous updating of your internal model of the world, and you are always at the center of that updating, always at the edge of the present. But the present itself is difficult to pin down. By the time you notice a moment, it has already passed. What you call now is, in some sense, a reconstruction, a slightly delayed integration of sensory input and neural processing. You are always just behind the leading edge of reality, and yet, it feels immediate. It feels real. It feels like the place where everything happens. This is the paradox of time as experience. Physically, time is flexible, relative, and woven into the structure of the universe. Psychologically, time is directional, continuous, and intimately tied to awareness. Somewhere between these two perspectives lies a deeper understanding that time may not be a single, uniform entity, but a layered phenomenon, part physical, part experiential, a way the universe organizes change, and a way it allows that change to be known, because without time, without sequence, without memory, without the unfolding of moments, there would be no story, no development, no awareness of becoming. And perhaps that is the role time plays in the larger picture, not just a dimension to measure events, but a medium through which the universe can experience itself, moment by moment, as something that is always changing, and always, somehow, present. Time is what prevents everything from happening at once. John Archibald Wheeler. Chapter 7. The Self as a Process. You feel like a single, continuous being. There is a sense of I that seems to persist through time. The same presence waking up in the morning, making decisions, remembering the past, and anticipating the future, even as your surroundings change, even as your thoughts shift. This feeling of identity remains. But what if that continuity is not what it seems? What if the self is not a fixed entity, but an ongoing process? At the biological level, your body is in constant flux. Cells divide, age, and are replaced. The atoms that make up your tissues are continuously exchanged with the environment through breathing, eating, and metabolism. Over time, much of the physical substance that composes you is renewed, and yet, you still feel like the same person. This suggests that identity is not tied to a specific set of particles, but to a pattern of structure that persists even as its components change. Like a flame has a recognizable shape and behavior, but the particles within it are constantly moving and being replaced. It exists not as a static object, but as a continuous process sustained over time. In much the same way, you are not a fixed collection of matter. You are a dynamic pattern. This becomes even clearer when we look at the mind. Thoughts arise and disappear. Emotions shift. Attention moves from one object to another. At no point do you find a single, unchanging self behind these experiences. Instead, there is a stream of mental activity that gives the impression of continuity. The sense of being a stable observer may itself be part of that flow. Neuroscience supports this view. Rather than locating the self in a single region of the brain, research suggests that what we call the self emerges from coordinated activity across multiple systems: memory, perception, decision-making, and bodily awareness working together in real time. There is no central point where you reside. There is only the ongoing integration of processes that create the experience of being you. This perspective aligns with ideas found in process philosophy, which proposes that reality is fundamentally composed of events and processes rather than static objects. From this view, stability is not the absence of change, but the result of continuous change occurring in a structured way. You are not something that exists and then changes. You are something that exists as change. This reframing has subtle but profound implications. If the self is a process, then it is not something you need to hold onto or defend as a fixed entity. It is not a rigid core that must remain unchanged. Instead, it is flexible, adaptive, and constantly being redefined by experience. Your identity is not a finished product. It is an ongoing activity. Memory plays a key role in maintaining this activity. By linking past experiences to the present, memory creates a narrative, a story that gives coherence to the flow of events. You remember who you were, and that memory informs who you believe you are now. But memory is not perfect. It is selective, reconstructive, and influenced by context. The story of the self is continuously edited, updated, and reinterpreted. In this sense, the you of today is not identical to the you of the past. It is a current version in an evolving sequence. Even your sense of agency, your feeling of making choices emerges from processes that operate both consciously and unconsciously. Decisions often begin forming in the brain before you become aware of them. By the time you experience the intention to act, underlying systems have already been at work. The self, then, is not a single author writing a story from outside the narrative. It is the story, unfolding from within. This does not mean that the self is an illusion in the sense of being unreal. It is real in the same way a wave is real, a distinct pattern that can be observed, described, and experienced. But it is not independent of the processes that create it. It does not exist apart from change. It is made of it. When you begin to see yourself in this way, something shifts. The pressure to maintain a fixed identity can soften. The idea that you must always be consistent, always the same, begins to loosen. Change is no longer a threat to who you are, it is the very substance of who you are. Growth, adaptation, transformation, these are not deviations from your identity. They are expressions of it. You are not a static observer moving through time. You are a dynamic process unfolding within it, a pattern shaped by countless interactions, biological, psychological, and environmental, continuously updating itself in response to the world. And just as a wave cannot be separated from the ocean, this process cannot be separated from the larger system in which it occurs. You are not only a process, you are part of a greater process, a localized pattern within the vast, ongoing activity of the universe itself. Changing, adapting, becoming, moment by moment. No one steps into the same river twice, for it is not the same river and they are not the same person. Heraclitus. Chapter 8. The Universe in Reflection. There is a moment, subtle but profound, when you look up at the night sky. Light from distant stars enters your eyes, photons that have traveled across vast stretches of space, some for millions or even billions of years. They arrive silently, carrying with them information about events that occurred long before you existed, and somehow, those distant events become part of your present experience. You see them. In that act, something remarkable happens. The universe, in a very real sense, becomes aware of itself. Not everywhere, not all at once, but here, in this moment, through a particular arrangement of matter and energy through your eyes, your brain, your awareness. Cosmic history is not only unfolding, but being noticed. This is reflection, not in the sense of a mirror passively returning an image, but in the deeper sense of a system, turning back on itself of reality, forming a perspective from within. For most of its history, the universe evolved without observation. Stars formed and collapsed, galaxies collided, particles interacted according to physical laws, with no indication that any of it was being experienced. But with the emergence of awareness, something new appeared, an internal viewpoint, a way for the universe to register its own existence. When you think about the cosmos, its scale, its origins, its structure, you are not standing outside it, analyzing it from a distance. You are part of it, using tools it has produced to understand itself. Your thoughts are patterns in the same fabric you are examining. The observer and the observed are not separate. They are two aspects of the same process. This idea has been expressed in different ways across science and philosophy. The astronomer Carl Sagan famously said that we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. It is a poetic statement, but also a precise one, because knowing requires structure. It requires systems capable of storing information, processing it, and integrating it into a coherent experience. It requires memory, language, and the ability to form abstract representations. All of these capacities arise from the same physical laws that govern stars and galaxies. There is no break in the chain. The atoms in your brain follow the same principles as the atoms in distant nebulae. The difference lies not in the substance, but in the arrangement, in the complexity of the pattern. At a certain level of organization, matter does something extraordinary. It becomes capable of modeling reality. And when those models include the system itself, when the universe becomes part of its own, representation, reflection occurs. You can think about your own thoughts. You can notice that you are aware. You can ask what it means to exist. These are not trivial abilities. They represent a recursive loop, awareness turning back on itself, creating layers of understanding that extend beyond immediate perception. In that loop, the universe gains depth. It is no longer only a sequence of events, but a system that can interpret those events, assign meaning to them, and explore their implications. Through language, this reflection becomes shareable. Ideas move between minds, building collective understanding. Science, philosophy, and art all emerge as extensions of this reflective capacity. Different ways the universe examines itself from multiple perspectives. Every equation, every theory, every story is part of this process, not separate from reality, but generated within it. Even uncertainty plays a role. The fact that we do not fully understand consciousness, or the ultimate nature of reality, is not a failure of the system. It is part of its ongoing exploration. The questions themselves are expressions of reflection. The universe does not arrive at understanding all at once. It unfolds it, gradually, through countless perspectives, through beings like you. This reframing shifts how we think about knowledge. Understanding is not something added to the universe from the outside. It is something that emerges within it, as certain configurations of matter become capable of insight. Each act of learning, each moment of realization, is a local increase in the universe's capacity to represent itself, a deepening of reflection, and this is not limited to grand, abstract thoughts about cosmology or existence. It occurs in ordinary moments, as well in the simple act of noticing your surroundings, in the awareness of your own thoughts, in the recognition that you are experiencing anything at all, right now. As you read or listen to these words, there is an awareness of them. That awareness is not separate from the process being described. It is an instance of it. The universe is not only being described, it is, in this moment, describing itself, through language, through thought, through you, and in that realization, the boundary between subject and object softens even further. You are not just a witness to reality. You are one of the ways reality becomes visible to itself, a point of view within a vast, interconnected system, a moment where existence turns inward and recognizes that it is here. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. Albert Einstein, Chapter 9, Meaning Without Separation. We often search for meaning as if it were something hidden, something distant, something external, something that must be discovered, earned, or given from outside the structure of existence itself. We ask what life means as though meaning were an object waiting to be found somewhere beyond us. But what if meaning is not separate from existence? What if it does not need to be imported into reality but emerges naturally from within it? When we see ourselves as isolated individuals, moving through a world of unrelated objects, meaning becomes a problem to solve. In a fragmented universe, significance feels uncertain. Why should anything matter if everything is ultimately separate? But as the illusion of separation begins to soften, the question itself begins to change, because meaning does not arise in isolation. It arises in relationship. A word has meaning only in relation to other words. A note in music gains significance through its connection to other notes. A moment in your life matters because of how it relates to what came before and what may come after. Meaning is not a standalone property. It is a pattern formed through connection. This perspective aligns with insights found in existentialism, which suggests that meaning is not pre-written into the universe, but emerges through experience, choice, and engagement. Rather than being imposed from above, it is created through participation. But if you are not separate from the universe, if you are part of the same unfolding process, then this creation is not happening outside reality. It is happening within it. Your experiences, your relationships, your thoughts and actions are not isolated events. They are interactions within a larger system. Meaning arises through these interactions between you and others, between perception and environment, between intention and outcome. A conversation matters because two perspectives meet. A memory matters because it connects past and present. A choice matters because it shapes what comes next. Meaning is woven into the fabric of these relationships. It is not something you have to search for in distant abstractions. It is something that emerges wherever connection exists. This does not make meaning trivial. It makes it immediate. If meaning arises through relationship, then it is present in every moment you are engaged with the world. Even simple experiences, a glance, a breath, a thought participate in this network of connections. They influence and are influenced, forming part of an ongoing pattern. Nothing exists entirely on its own, and because of that, nothing is entirely without significance. This reframing also changes how we think about purpose. Instead of asking, "What is my purpose?" as if there were a single, fixed answer, we might ask, "How do my actions participate in the larger process I am part of?" Purpose becomes less about fulfilling a predetermined role and more about how you engage with the relationships that define your experience. It becomes dynamic, contextual, alive. In this view, meaning is not something fragile that can be lost if certain conditions are not met. It does not depend on a single achievement or a final answer. It is continuously generated through interaction, renewed in every moment of awareness and participation. Even uncertainty becomes meaningful. Even questioning becomes part of the process. Because to question is to engage, and to engage is to form relationships, and from those relationships, meaning emerges. This does not eliminate difficulty or suffering. Experiences can still be painful, confusing, or overwhelming. But even those experiences exist within the network of connection. They influence growth, reshape understanding, and alter the trajectory of what comes next. They are not outside the process, they are part of it. When separation fades, meaning no longer needs to be justified from a distance, it becomes intrinsic, not because the universe provides a single, universal answer to the question of meaning, but because the very structure of reality interconnected, dynamic, relational gives rise to meaning wherever experience occurs. And you are not outside that structure. You are one of the places where it happens, a point where relationships converge, where interactions take form, where the abstract becomes personal. You do not need to step outside the universe to find meaning. You only need to recognize your place within it, because meaning is not something waiting beyond existence. It is something that unfolds as existence, through connection, through experience, through you. The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. Alan Watts. Chapter 10. The Return to Wonder. The more closely you look at reality, the less it settles into certainty. What once seemed simple matter, time, self, observation begins to dissolve into layers of structure and relationship. Physics reveals a universe that is not fixed in the way it appears. Biology reveals a self that is not stable in the way it feels. Consciousness reveals an inner world that cannot be fully reduced to external description, and yet, nothing disappears. Instead, everything becomes more intricate. Science does not remove mystery, it refines it. When you learn that the atoms in your body were formed in the hearts of stars, the fact does not make existence smaller, it makes it more astonishing. When you learn that time bends under gravity, it does not make time less real, it makes it more strange. When you learn that the self is a process rather than a thing, it does not erase identity, it deepens its complexity. Understanding does not end wonder, it redirects it. At the edges of knowledge, questions begin to multiply again, not because we have failed to understand, but because understanding itself reveals new dimensions of the unknown. Each answer opens into further inquiry. Each explanation rests upon deeper structures that remain partially hidden. This is not a flaw in human knowledge. It is the nature of inquiry within a vast and unfolding universe. In this sense, wonder is not something we begin with and then outgrow. It is something we return to often with greater depth, not less. The child's sense of awe is immediate and unstructured. The adult's sense of awe, when it returns, carries with it the weight of understanding, history, and context. Both are forms of seeing, but one has passed through knowledge. The idea that the universe experiencing itself, is not a conclusion that closes thought. It is a lens that opens it. It does not eliminate questions about consciousness, identity, or meaning. Instead, it reframes them as expressions of a deeper process still unfolding. You are not standing outside this mystery, trying to solve it from a distance. You are part of it. Every perception you have is an instance of the universe being locally aware. Every thought is a pattern arising within the same reality it is contemplating. Even doubt, even uncertainty, is part of this unfolding awareness trying to understand itself. There is something quietly profound in this recursive loop. Existence giving rise to awareness, and awareness giving rise to questions about existence. The universe does not become less mysterious as it becomes more known. It becomes more intimate, because now the mystery is not only out there, in distant galaxies or invisible quantum fields, it is also here in the act of thinking, in the experience of being, in the simple fact that anything is present at all, and in that shift, wonder returns, not as ignorance, but as recognition that reality is larger than any single description of it, that every model, every theory, every narrative is a partial glimpse of something still unfolding, that even the most advanced understanding is still participation from within, not observation from outside. To live with this awareness is not to resolve everything into clarity. It is to remain open to depth, to allow questions to remain alive even as knowledge grows. The universe is not a solved equation. It is an ongoing expression, and you are one of its current articulations. a moment in which matter has organized itself into reflection, a brief configuration in which existence becomes aware of existence, and then continues, without finality, into further transformation. So, the final insight is not an answer, it is a way of seeing that everything you encounter, every star, every thought, every breath is part of a single unfolding process that is still in motion, and that you are not separate from it, not an observer standing apart, but a living instance of it, here and now, experiencing its own becoming. The more deeply this is felt, the more ordinary life itself becomes quietly extraordinary. A conversation becomes a meeting of worlds. A moment of attention becomes a point where the universe focuses itself. And even this present instant, this very awareness reading these words becomes something vast and simple at the same time. Not a conclusion, not an end, but a continuation. The universe, still exploring what it is. Through you, look up at the stars and not down at your feet. Stephen Hawking. Conclusion, you are never outside it. In the end, there is no final distance from which to observe the universe. Every attempt to step outside it mentally, philosophically, or scientifically brings you back to the same place. Here, in experience itself, you are always within what you are trying to understand. Every question, every model, every insight arises inside the system it describes. There is no position beyond reality from which reality can be fully seen. Only participation. Across these chapters, we traced a path from the origins of matter to the emergence of awareness, from the structure of physical law to the experience of self, from the illusion of separation to the possibility of meaning within connection. Each step pointed in the same direction, toward a universe that is not merely a backdrop for life, but a process in which life and thought are expressions of its unfolding. You began as stardust, not metaphorically, but materially. The elements that compose you were forged in ancient stars, scattered across space, and gathered into new forms over billions of years. From that history came planets, chemistry, biology, and eventually consciousness, the ability of the universe to model itself from within. Through this lens, awareness is not an accident sitting on top of matter. It is one of the ways matter behaves when organized in sufficiently complex patterns, a rare configuration in which existence becomes visible to itself. And yet, even this description is incomplete, because experience is not something that can be fully captured from the outside. It is always lived from within, no matter how precise our theories become. They do not replace the immediacy of being aware. The feeling of existing remains irreducible in the first-person sense. This is the quiet boundary where explanation meets experience. And instead of trying to erase that boundary, this perspective invites you to notice it, to recognize that it is not a gap in reality, but a feature of it. A universe capable of observation must necessarily contain points of view. A universe capable of reflection must necessarily contain mirrors. And you are one of those mirrors, not separate from what is reflected, but part of it. The sense of being an isolated self moving through an external world is useful. It allows coordination, survival, decision, and identity. But it is not the whole picture. Beneath it lies a deeper continuity, fields interacting, matter exchanging, time unfolding, systems arising and dissolving in endless transformation. You are not a closed object in that flow. You are a pattern within it, a temporary stabilization of processes that extend far beyond any single lifetime or perspective. Seen this way, life is not something happening to you from the outside. It is something happening as you. The distinction between observer and observed softens. The universe is not divided into you and everything else, but expressed through countless local centers of experience, each revealing a different angle of the same unfolding reality. And meaning, rather than being imposed from elsewhere, arises naturally from this participation, from connection, from relationship, from the simple fact that something is here, aware, engaged, and able to notice that it is part of a larger whole. There is no final answer that closes the question of existence, but there is a shift in how the question is held, from seeking separation to recognizing belonging, from trying to stand outside the universe to realizing you never left it, from asking what the universe is to noticing what it is doing right now, in this moment, as thought, as perception, as awareness itself. And in that recognition, something subtle happens. Ordinary experience becomes enough, not because mystery disappears, but because it is no longer distant. It is present in everything, in breath, in memory, in light arriving from distant stars, in the quiet fact that there is experience at all. You are not a visitor in this reality. You are not passing through it from somewhere else. You are what it looks like from the inside when the universe becomes aware of itself. And even this conclusion is not an end, only another moment in the ongoing process. The universe, still unfolding, still exploring, still being, through you,